What's up, art family? Taylor Payton here of thebeginnerdrawingcourse.com, and today we are going to be walking you through a full character sheet creation. So this is for my character Kalti. She is from the universe Gildian, and that is the personal project that I've been working on since college, on and off in between freelance. Anyway, basically what we're going to cover in this is just creating a character concept sheet for your characters. We're going to talk a little bit about character design, just some things in terms of color palette, as well as different choices for posing and different portraits. All of this I cover in way more detail in the character drawing course, which you can find a link to in the description box below. And let's just hop right into it. So basically, this is the initial sketching stage. I already have a pretty good idea of where I want to go with this character, as I have drawn her multiple times before. And I advocate for that in the character drawing course as well, wherein you actually get comfortable drawing the character numerous times, different poses, different aspects. But if you're just generating a character, this will still work, because we work based on principles and fundamentals and work our way upwards from there. We start with our basis first. So in this case, I'm trying to figure out a pose for the character since I've already drawn her several times. As I mentioned, here's one drawing I'm tossing up on the screen right now of a quick sketch I did of her in black and white a couple months before I even recorded this video. So now I know it's just more about the pose. And since I had 5 characters to do for this course, 5 of the main characters from Gildian, she is the most magic oriented. She's actually also of a different race than the other characters. She is a Vestalian. Now, I'm not going to go into the details or backstory of that. It's only important insofar as the design is concerned. Basically, she has very, very kind of opalescent skin. It is a little bit refractive, but I didn't show that because it's not a painting, so I didn't have the material kind of differentiation in the render. So I just sort of simplify it and make it pretty much white skin. And not white like your, Caucasian person. I mean white as in the mixture of all the colors as a ray of light white. But basically, at this stage, I'm just drawing and erasing limbs, trying to configure a way for her to look natural and like she's having fun and just convey some personality. So it's not just a character standing there, because everybody sees that. We all see that on ArtStation and DeviantArt and other art sites that you probably go to. And it's like, okay, well, maybe the design's cool, but the pose is really boring. Now, it's really good to get your basic poses down for when you're doing professional concept art. It's just easier to express the design rather than the character. So it's a good thing to do, but in this case, I'm trying to configure how the limbs are going to be oriented in a way that has a little more motion, a little more dynamism, some more diagonals, some more action. So as you can see, even though I'm configuring the pose still, I realize that I kind of like the upper body for the most part, and I have an idea of her outfit design already. So her outfit is basically sort of a nod to Heisenko from, I think it's Darkstalkers. That was a game that I played in the arcade as a kid, and I really liked the large shape language of the sleeves. I like really big sleeves. I think she's some sort of like Japanese or Chinese, like mythical monster kind of inspired design. They have those sort of attire. The attire from the Heisenko design, which I'm throwing up on the screen right now, is just what inspired a lot of Kalti's outfit, except I made it my own by subdividing a lot of the areas of that outfit in ways that you won't find in the typical cultural attire that inspired this design. The subdivisions are just my own design motifs that I like to use, and then we have some pretty normal kind of knee-high. I'm not going to call them socks because they're not a sock-like material. It's sort of like a knee-high leg guard, in addition to having just sort of a skirt at the very end, which is a little more Japanese schoolgirl inspired, and it's just sort of a cool way to get across an interesting outfit that kind of shapes its way up through a couple different influences. So basically, you want to filter all of your influences through your character design and kind of dress the character appropriately based on that. You'll also notice that I have circular motifs for the end of the sleeves, as well as circular motifs for her glasses. And those are important because we're repeating shape language and repeating motifs. It's like repeating similar notes in a musical composition, because that way you have a lot more repetition. There's something for the ear to latch onto, and likewise, we want visual harmony. We want that harmony to follow a pattern that the viewer can recognize consciously or subconsciously, preferably both. So in this case, you can also see that the bottom of the skirt would also be an ellipse or a circular motif. These are just helpful because it creates some visual consistency, and consistency with some variety is basically what we're going for. So once I had nailed that pose down to a reasonable degree where she's just sort of like popping a little bit of magic out and kind of playfully strolling forward or skipping forward, I figure it's time to get more portrait oriented, because we're doing a character concept sheet after all. And in these character concept sheets, we want some portrait action because it helps showcase the character's face, especially when they're covered up by things like glasses or masks. It's just really another pretty standard concept art practice, pretty standard character design practice that I want you to get used to. And again, I go through how you can sketch portraits and break down portraits and have an easier time drawing portraits in my character drawing course, link in the description box. But for this, I was just drawing pretty much straight out of my head, thinking of her facial structure, not in the same sort of anime-esque sense as her full body kind of drawing. That's more of a stylized version. I'm going semi-realistic with this version, with the portrait version, just because I wanted to see what she would look like in that sort of variant as well. You know, she has a bit of a stronger face with still very feminine features like the eyes, an upturned nose, because again, I want her to seem a little bit different because she's not the same race as the other characters. And that comes into play in the story of Gildian. But it's just, again, informing the design decisions. Every design decision that you make should have some logical backing and some intuitive backing. You should be able to give a logical reason why you chose a certain shape or why you choose certain motifs. And then you need to know intuitively and on an emotional level why you're making those decisions as well, and what feeling you're getting from making that choice, and what feeling you want to convey to your viewers. You know, you don't want them to feel bored when they look at something, and that's it's kind of a shame, but we've all done it. We've all created boring stuff. I make tons of boring stuff still. You have to constantly remind yourself to create something that has some visual pop, some flair. And the way to do that is to have interesting shapes that work together harmoniously to create more dynamic things, like, you know, for example, the movement of her full body pose, and to have a fair amount of, you know, movement and life to things. And you get a lot of life by doing life drawing, especially portrait drawing of your friends, your family members, going to life drawing classes or workshops, or just sitting in on life drawings when there's no instruction. And in this case, I got one portrait done. It was more reflective of how I wanted her to look. Her chin was a little too broad before. It was looking more like her brother's facial structure. And even though they are twins, I didn't want it to be too obvious that she has more masculine features, because I reserved those for her brother. So I ended up feminizing her design a little bit. You can always think of design in terms of sliders, you know, the masculine, the feminine, the androgynous, everything in between. It's all up to you as far as your characters are concerned. Now, when I talk about things not being boring, you also want to inculcate some more expression, some more, you know, not just movement, but some more animatedness, some more character, some more life. And to imbue that, I'm having a different emotion other than just sort of a standard portrait, like, hey, it's a portrait, and that's nice, you know, but she's actually having thoughts in this other drawing. And since I already had one portrait done, it becomes easier and easier as you're doing the character sheet to create consistent and interesting things, because you have reference right on the same picture plane. Now, you can have reference on your computer, for example, and you can totally use reference in whatever way you want, as long as you're making it your own. But in this case, one thing that's really magical to me, and one thing I like to advocate for, is using reference on the same picture plane. So creating your own reference, in essence. So in this case, I was drawing in her in sort of a quizzical, kind of puzzled or thinking sort of pose, and it's a vignette. I'm not drawing every single element up until her half body. I'm just going to draw the hand, just so that I can showcase, okay, she's thinking, and the hand helps me express that. The face and the hands are the most expressive parts of the body next to the body itself, really. So those are all I really needed to show, like, hey, she's trying to figure something out. It also gives me a chance to showcase her different motifs and design elements on her hands. Different rings, different bits of jewelry and accessories, which again, I talk a lot about in the character drawing course. And in this case, it's just all drawing right now. We're just gonna draw all these shapes and try to see what they're like as we turn the forms, more of a straight on view with one portrait and more of a 3/4 view in the other. And then we have the bigger design of the full body. So in this case, I just wanted to get a good look at everything. So you see me zooming out here on the canvas, getting a full picture of her and her different portraits, and also adding some more accessories. Her hand was just sort of open before. Now I have a small little tome in her hand, because one of the motifs of this character is that she is constantly reading or studying, always trying to learn new spells, refine her current spells, and she's just really obsessive about having all these books around her because she's kind of cramming in perpetuity. And that's something that I add as a quirk to the character. It's something that serves her really well sometimes and really detracts from her abilities at other times. And you want things like these double-edged swords when you're designing your characters, because it makes them interesting, it makes them flawed, it makes them potent. And that, to me, is one of the most fun things about having very character-driven narratives. Is you have to have characters that have depth to them. They have to be very, very three-dimensional, four-dimensional, fifth-dimensional galaxy brain characters once you get up to that point, because it makes the story fun to watch unfold. One-dimensional characters and two-dimensional characters, the kind of stuff you create when you're 13, or the kind of stuff you care for when you're like 15 and your tastes haven't developed. Not to be ageist in any capacity. It's just usually the more experience that you gain, the more you study, the more really good and potent, artistic, and very crafted kind of things that you imbibe and that you consume, in terms of like really good video games, really good anime, really good comics, really good movies. I'm not saying you should consume and not create. I'm just saying that once you watch the really good stuff, once you read the really good stuff, then you start to break down in your mind what the really good stuff is, and you transpose those principles back to your stuff. It's how we learn, it's how we create, it's how we grow, it's how we evolve. So in this case, I know that I want her to have a lot of dimensionality, and that is done by getting all these different books in her possession and always around her in some way. And yes, she floats them around sometimes. She has a lot of arcana, which is the word for magic in the Gildean universe, and it allows her to just leverage it for all these purposes and spells. Sometimes she relies a little too much on it. Again, there's all these different ways that a character can come across as having personality and dimension and being fun to watch or fun to read. And that's always my goal, is to help you guys figure out what the basics are so that you can apply them in your own unique ways. You just want the information to express your inspiration, and that's kind of the crux here. As far as the character sheet goes, I'm now just drawing some additional books and ideas and little spell shapes. Really, it's just like a glorified sketchbook page that you can feel very free in, even though I'm staying relatively tight in terms of my line work. Of course, it's not perfect. It's not super crisp cover worthy line art. It's really more just about having something that's very readable, something that's very appealing, and you can tell what it is in an instant, really. So that's the goal. And then I'm adding these design motifs, things that I made in a shape pack, a long time ago, and they finally come into play here because I rarely ever use them. It was just when I was experimenting in Photoshop. But yeah, more shape design, and that's something that's going to help tell stories about her. She's very geometric. There's lots of sigils with the spells, and so she has to study all of this complex geometry and how it works in order to perfectly craft her arcana, perfectly channel her energy down the proper paths to send spells out that don't backfire or misfire. Because again, double-edged sword, catch-22, whatever you want to call it, it can be good or bad. Lastly, before we wrap this up, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the color palette. So the color palette is where we have the various colors that are going to make up this character design and the reasons why we chose them. Again, the logic and intuition kind of dynamic at play. And this color palette is based on the primary color palette, one of the most basic color palettes there is, because for one, it's easy to work with and it's bright and appealing. So I just go in and fill her with a very light, super sort of cloud blue. And then I'm figuring out what shape I'm going to denote as what color. So it helps just to have one big raw fill to separate her from the page, and then you go in using a no opacity brush to lay in some of those other colors. Or as you saw there, I used the lasso tool to kind of frame what I wanted to color in, and then just use the fill tool or the fill shortcut, which is Shift F5, to make that happen. In this case, I wanted a lot of red for her outfit to contrast with her very light bluish skin and her cyan colored hair. And then we have this sort of variant of red, which is these super dark, not quite maroon, but darker, browner, kind of warm gray. Not warm gray. It's grayer than the red, but it's really a very kind of a dusky tone that won't take as much attention as the upper body stuff, because the lower body stuff doesn't require as much in this character design, and oftentimes it doesn't. Just in general in character design, unless they have pants that serve a really good purpose, or shoes or something of that ilk. So in this case, I'm now just coloring the shoes, making them nice and dark, easy contrast. And then I have the different areas, because I've subdivided all these areas. I can just pick where I want each color to be, and I'll know if there's too much of a color. Like when I added all that yellow, I'm like, that's just too much yellow intuitively, but maybe it works on the other arm. So maybe I break it up with a little more blue here so that I separate the arm and the body a little more. So all these little subdivisions on the design help to figure out where you're going to color different aspects of the character. And in this case, I wanted a nice balance between the red, the yellow, and the blue, and I got that in her upper body, and I felt that that was pretty clean after messing with it just a little bit. You see me going in and choosing it, and intuitively you'll feel like all these colors are off, or there's too much of this color. It's really just about finding balance between each character. The only thing I can really say is you don't want perfect like mathematical subdivisions of color. For example, this character is half blue and half red, because that's really hard to pull off. You want things that are sort of staggered. Like, for example, she has, let's say, 40% red and 25% blue, and so that adds up to 65%. And then she has just the various other colors make up the additional 35% that she would need to kind of have a fully rounded character in terms of the color. Being the smallest subdivisions, maybe 5% for the hair, and maybe 2.5% for the skin. It's probably a little bit more for both, but I'm just making these mathematical approximations so that you can have sort of a rough idea of how I'm parsing the color logically. You just don't want 25% blue, 25% red, 25% yellow, because it's going to be very robotic. And unless you're going for a robotic design, a very mechanized, kind of stale or sterile feeling thing, then you want to break up things sort of unevenly in terms of the color distribution. But after I was pretty pleased with her color, which has a lot of pop, a lot of vibrance, despite her personality being a bit brisk or bossy at times, it kind of shows that her people have a lot of rich, prismatic design to them. at least through this character. Not all of them do. It's not like a sweeping generalization of a fictional race or anything, but oftentimes Vestalians do have a lot of color and pop in their attire because they're very pale and light-skinned, and so color looks really good on their beings. And so I just kind of leaned into that because it's just basic color theory. And if you want to know more about color theory, you can check out the beginner painting course, which again, I'll link in the description box. So all these different courses are just ways of me giving you the knowledge that I can't give you in one video because it's just too much. I have weeks and weeks of videos for you with assignments to help you get this stuff inculcated into your brain, into your nervous system, so it can flow out of your hands and you actually have to think less about it once you understand it. Because unless you run into problems, you really don't have to process all that much consciously. It's just about subconscious creation, which is my goal for you always and my goal for myself, because we want to just feel free to create. But oftentimes we run into problems, and then it's when we go back into the fundamentals so that those fundamentals can give us informed templates to base our decisions on, because the masters were kind enough to spend their whole lives learning them from the previous masters, standing on the shoulders of the giants before them, and then bringing them down into an understandable format for us to do the same. So lastly, I just color the same process with this final portrait. I really hope you enjoyed this process. It is my joy to share it with you. It is my absolute honor to give you what I know and what I have learned throughout my years of practicing drawing, painting, character design, etc. And I hope that it inspires you to work on your personal projects, inspires you to improve your artistic caliber and go in on your artistic education and invest in yourself, because you're worth it. You're genuinely worth it. We're all worth it. We just need to put in the hours, to have fun, to overcome the stumbling blocks, and to keep making art. So this is pretty much the end of the video. I will see you in the next one. Thank you for your subscription. Thank you for your likes, your thumbs up. All of it is vastly appreciated, and I will catch you next time. Take care and happy drawing.